me in, too. Come on, boys! Get your guns! Listen to me, man!
John Ford made westerns that defined the genre. But when critics asked what he thought were the greatest westerns ever made, he didn't mention his own films. These are the 9 westerns Ford himself called masterpieces, and some of these picks will absolutely surprise you. Number 9, High Noon.
You've been my friend all my life. You got me this job. You made him send for me.
This one's complicated because Ford publicly trashed High Noon, while privately admiring what Fred Zinnemann pulled off. In interviews, Ford called it un-American, said it betrayed everything the Western stood for, claimed Gary Cooper, walking around town begging for help, went against the whole spirit of the frontier. Howard Hawks hated it so much, he made Rio Bravo as a direct response. But people who knew Ford well, including Peter Bogdanovich, said the old man's public criticism was mostly jealousy, mixed with respect, for a film that did something genuinely new with the genre. High Noon strips away everything Ford built his career on. There's no community coming together, no cavalry riding to the rescue, no faith in American institutions. It's just one man, a tin star, in a town full of cowards who won't stand with him. Marshal Will Kane has just gotten married. He's about to retire, and then word comes that Frank Miller, a Kohler Kane sent to prison, is coming back on the noon train with his gang to settle scores. Kane tries to recruit deputies. He goes to the church, the saloon, his friends, even his former mentor. Everyone has an excuse. Everyone abandons him.
Nothing that happens here is really important. Now get out.
There isn't time.
What Ford secretly admired, according to those close to him, was how Zinnemann shot the film. The stark black and white cinematography, the way the clock keeps appearing on screen builds tension. The real-time structure where the film's 85 minutes matches the actual time Kane has before Miller arrives. That's pure cinematic craftsmanship, and Ford recognized it even if he wouldn't say so publicly. The use of shadows, the empty streets, the way Zinnemann frames Cooper alone in the frame, emphasizing his isolation, it's directing at the highest level. Gary Cooper's performance is what really makes the film work. He's not playing some fearless hero. You can see the fear in his face, the exhaustion, the disillusionment, as person after person refuses to help him. There's a scene where he's writing his will because he knows he's probably going to die. And Cooper plays it with this quiet dignity that's absolutely devastating. This isn't John Wayne swaggering into danger. This is a real man terrified but doing his duty anyway because somebody has to. The political subtext wasn't lost on Ford either. High Noon came out during the Hollywood blacklist era, and screenwriter Carl Foreman was himself being targeted by the House Un-American Activities Committee. The story of a man abandoned by his community when he needs them most. That was clearly about McCarthyism and the cowardice of people who wouldn't stand up to the witch hunts. Ford was no fan of communism, but he also despised the blacklist and what it did to the film community. That political courage in the script, telling that story when it could have destroyed careers, Ford respected that even if he disagreed with Foreman's politics. The final shootout subverts every Western convention. There's no honorable face-off in the street at High Noon. It's desperate, ugly, and Kane only survives because his Quaker wife, who spent the whole film insisting she'd leave him if he fought, picks up a gun and shoots one of the colors in the back. Then Kane throws his marshal's badge in the dirt and leaves town with his wife, disgusted by the people who wouldn't help him. That ending, that rejection of the community, went against everything Ford built his westerns on. But it was honest, it was powerful, and deep down, Ford knew it was a masterpiece, even if admitting it meant acknowledging someone had found a new way to tell Western stories. Number 8, The Ox-Bow Incident. Ford called this the most important Western ever made about American justice, and he wasn't exaggerating. William Wellman directed this stripped-down morality play that takes everything audiences expected from a Western and turns it into a nightmare about mob violence and failed morality. The whole film takes place over about 24 hours, and in that time, it shows exactly how quickly civilized people can become a lynch mob. The setup is deceptively simple. Cattle have been rustled in a Nevada valley, and a rancher has been cold. A posse forms to hunt down the rustlers, but it's not really about justice. It's about anger, boredom, and men looking for an excuse to use violence. Henry Fonda plays a drifter who gets swept up in the mob, and he's one of the few voices trying to slow things down. suggesting maybe they should wait for the sheriff. Maybe they should actually verify guilt before they start hanging people. Nobody wants to hear it. What makes the Oxbow incident so powerful is how Wellman shows the mechanics of mob mentality. There's a former Confederate officer who takes command of the posse and turns it into a military operation, giving everyone permission to abandon individual moral responsibility. There's the local blowhard who's pushing hardest for lynching because it makes him feel important. There are good men who know what's happening is wrong, but stay silent because they don't want to seem weak or be ostracized by the group. Wellman doesn't let anyone off the hook. He shows exactly how normal people become participants in murder. The film was a commercial disaster when it was released in 1943. Audiences didn't want a dark meditation on American violence during World War II. They wanted escapism and heroes. But Ford recognized immediately what Wellman had accomplished. This wasn't just a Western. It was a film about the fragility of civilization and the ease with which people abandon principles when the mob is watching. Ford himself had made Westerns about community and frontier justice, but he'd always shown those communities as fundamentally decent. The Oxbow incident shows what happens when that decency evaporates. The actual lynching sequence is brutal in its simplicity. 3 men, 2 cowboys, and an old man are captured and accused of rustling and murder. They protest their innocence. One of them has a wife and children. They beg for time to prove they're innocent, suggest sending someone to verify their story. The mob doesn't want verification, they want action. So they hang them from a tree while good men watch and do nothing. Wellman shoots it without melodrama or sentimentality. It's just cold, ugly, and wrong. The devastating climax comes afterward when the posse returns to town and discovers the supposedly murdered rancher is alive, and the real rustlers have been caught. The 3 men they lynched were completely innocent. There's a scene where Fonda reads aloud a letter one of the victims wrote to his wife before he died, and it's one of the most powerful moments in any Western. The letter talks about hoping his death might make people think about what they're doing, might make someone stand up next time. But you can see in the faces of the men listening that nothing's going to change. They'll live with what they did, but they won't learn from it. Ford admired the moral courage it took to make this film. Wellman didn't offer easy answers or redemption. He showed American darkness honestly and trusted the audience to face it. That kind of uncompromising vision, using the Western genre to examine fundamental questions about justice and morality, that's what Ford believed the best Westerns should do. He praised the Oxbow incident constantly, and considered it essential viewing for anyone who wanted to understand what Westerns could achieve beyond entertainment. Number 7. The Gunfighter.
How about a drink, Mr. Frazzlebottom?
No, thanks.
Henry King's masterpiece starring Gregory Peck is the film that proved Westerns could be genuine tragedy, and Ford never stopped talking about how perfect it was. The Gunfighter tells the story of Jimmy Ringo, the fastest gun alive, who's tired of killing and just wants to settle down. But everywhere he goes, his reputation follows him. Young punks looking to make a name, lawmen who don't want trouble in their towns, people who remember old grudges. The film takes place almost entirely in one day, mostly in one saloon, and it's essentially about a man waiting to die. What Ford loved about this film was its absolute commitment to realism. Gregory Peck insisted on wearing a drooping mustache that the studio hated, though it made him look older and less handsome. Peck didn't care. Real gunfighters in the Old West wore mustaches like that, and he wanted authenticity over vanity. That small detail signals what kind of film this is. It's not interested in glamorizing the gunfighter. It's interested in showing the reality of being famous for killing people. The genius of the film is in how it deconstructs the Western hero before that became a common thing to do. Ringo walks into a town where he once had a sweetheart, hoping to convince her and their son to leave with him and start over somewhere nobody knows his name. But she's moved on, built a respectable life, and his son doesn't even know who his father is. Throughout the film, Ringo sits in that saloon, drinking coffee, trying to stay patient while the marshal arranges for him to leave town quietly. But everyone in town knows Jimmy Ringo is there, and they all have their own reasons for seeking him out. There's a young hothead who thinks killing Ringo will make him famous. There are 3 brothers hunting Ringo because he killed their sibling in self-defense years ago. There are curiosity seekers who just want to see the famous gunfighter up close. And through it all, Ringo just wants to be left alone. Peck plays him with this weary dignity. A man who's done terrible things, but isn't a terrible person. Who's tired of the violence, but knows it's never going to stop following him. Ford pointed to the scene where Ringo talks to his son without revealing who he is as one of the greatest moments in any Western. The boy is playing outside the saloon, and Ringo strikes up a conversation, asking about school and friends and what he wants to be when he grows up. The kid has no idea he's talking to his father, and Ringo can't tell him because it would destroy the normal life the boy has. Peck plays it with such restraint and heartbreak, and you understand everything Ringo has lost by becoming what he became. The ending is inevitable and perfect. Just when it looks like Ringo might actually make it out of town alive, the young punk who's been building up courage all day finally shoots him in the back. Ringo dies knowing his reputation will now pass to his color, who will face the same cycle of violence, the same inability to escape, the same lonely death in some dusty town. Ford loved that cyclical tragedy, the way the film shows how violence perpetuates itself, and how being the best at calling makes you a prisoner rather than a hero. What impressed Ford most was how Henry King shot the film, without any wasted moments or false drama. Every scene serves the story. Every character interaction reveals something essential. The pacing is deliberate but never slow, building tension through Ringo's isolation and the ticking clock of how long before someone makes a move. It's economical filmmaking at the highest level, proving you don't need sprawling landscapes and massive action set pieces to make a great Western. Sometimes you just need a great character, a moral dilemma, and the courage to follow it to its honest conclusion. Number 6. Red River. Howard Hawks made the Western Ford wished he had directed, and Ford admitted it freely. Red River is the story of a massive cattle drive from Texas to Missouri, but it's really about fathers and sons, obsession and pride, and what happens when a great man becomes a tyrant. John Wayne plays Thomas Dunson, a rancher who spends years building a cattle empire in Texas, and then has to drive 10,000 head north to market or lose everything. Montgomery Clift plays his adopted son Matthew, who starts the drive loyal to Dunson, but ends up having to mutiny against him to save the herd and the men. What Ford loved about Red River was how Hawks took the framework of mutiny on the Bounty and transplanted it into a Western. Dunson starts as this powerful, capable leader who built something from nothing through sheer will and violence. But the pressure of the drive, combined with his refusal to listen to anyone else's input, turns him into Captain Bligh on horseback. He becomes cruel, unreasonable, willing to hang men for minor infractions. When Matthew finally takes the herd from him, it's not a power grab. It's the only way to prevent Dunson from destroying everything he built. The relationship between Wayne and Clift is the heart of the film, and it's one of the most complex father-son dynamics in any Western. Dunson loves Matthew, raised him, taught him everything, and expects absolute loyalty in return. Matthew respects Dunson, understands what he accomplished, but won't follow him into madness. The moment when Matthew takes over, when Dunson promises to hunt him down and cull him, that's genuine tragedy. These men love each other, but Dunson's pride won't allow him to bend, and Matthew's principles won't allow him to obey. Ford also admired how Hawks shot the cattle drive itself. The sheer scale of those scenes, thousands of actual cattle being driven across real terrain, the dust and chaos and constant danger. It's some of the most impressive practical filmmaking ever accomplished in a Western. Hawks didn't cut corners. He put his cast and crew through an actual cattle drive, and you can see the authenticity in every frame. The river crossings, the stampedes, the exhaustion on everyone's faces, that's all real. The supporting cast is filled with character actors who make every scene memorable. Walter Brennan is the old cowhand who's seen everything and provides moral commentary. John Ireland is the gunslinger Cherry Valance, who becomes Matthew's right hand. Joanne Drew as the wagon train woman who falls for Matthew and eventually talks sense into Dunson. Hawks gave each of these characters distinct personalities and motivations, making the cattle drive feel populated with real people rather than stock Western types. The ending caused some controversy because it seems to resolve the conflict too easily. After the herd reaches Missouri, Dunson catches up to Matthew, and they're about to have a shootout when the woman intervenes and basically tells them they're being ridiculous, that they love each other and should stop acting like idiots. Dunson suddenly snaps out of his obsession, forgives Matthew, and they reconcile. Some critics called it a cop-out. Ford disagreed. He said Hawks understood that the real courage wasn't in having them cull each other. It was in showing that even deeply damaged men could choose reconciliation over violence. Red River proved that Westerns could handle complex psychological drama and family dynamics without losing any of their epic scale or entertainment value. Ford called it a perfect blend of character and action, saying Hawks had achieved something rare, making a film that satisfied both the audience's need for spectacle and the artist's need for truth. That balance, that ability to be both popular entertainment and serious drama, that's what Ford believed the greatest Westerns should accomplish. Number 5. Shane. George Stevens took Jack Schaefer's novel and turned it into what Ford called the most perfect distillation of Western mythology ever filmed. Shane is the archetypal story, the mysterious gunfighter who rides into a valley, helps homesteaders fight off a ruthless cattle baron, and then rides away because men like him don't get to settle down and live peaceful lives. Ford had told similar stories himself, but he admitted Stevens had refined the formula to its purest essence. What makes Shane so powerful is how Stevens shot it. The whole film takes place in this Wyoming valley, with the Grand Tetons looming in the background, and Stevens used that landscape to create an almost mythical feeling. The mountains represent something eternal and unchanging, while the valley represents civilization trying to take root. Shane rides down from those mountains, does what needs doing, and then rides back into them because he belongs to that wild, eternal world, not the domestic, civilized one the homesteaders are building. Alan Ladd plays Shane with this quiet dignity that makes him feel larger than life. Even though Ladd was actually quite short, and they had to use tricks to make him appear taller next to the other actors. But it works because Shane's power isn't physical. It's in his competence, his calm, his absolute certainty about who he is and what he can do. When he straps on his gun for the final confrontation, it's like watching a priest put on vestments. This is his calling, his purpose, even though it's going to cost him everything he wants. The film is told largely from the perspective of young Joey Starrett, played by Brandon DeWilde, and that child's viewpoint is crucial. To Joey, Shane is everything a man should be: strong, capable, kind, mysterious. The hero worship is palpable, and it makes the ending even more devastating when Joey realizes Shane is leaving, and nothing he says will change that. The famous final scene where Joey runs after Shane yelling, "Come back, Shane," became iconic because it captures that moment every child faces when they realize their heroes are human and flawed and can't stay forever. Ford particularly admired the relationship between Shane and Marion Starrett, the homesteader's wife played by Jean Arthur. There's clearly attraction between them, but Stevens handles it with incredible restraint. Nothing inappropriate happens. Shane respects the boundaries of their marriage, absolutely. But you can see in the glances they exchange, in the way they're careful not to be alone together, that under different circumstances, something could have developed. That adult acknowledgement of complicated feelings without betraying commitments, that impressed Ford deeply. The villain Riker, played by Emil Meyer, isn't some cartoonish bad guy. He's a cattleman who was in the valley first and doesn't see why he should give up his way of life for farmers. His argument actually makes some sense, which makes the conflict more interesting than simple good versus evil. And when Riker brings in gunfighter Wilson, played terrifyingly by Jack Palance, the threat becomes existential. Wilson isn't fighting for land or principles. He culls because that's what he does, and he's very good at it. The final showdown between Shane and Wilson is one of the greatest gunfight sequences ever filmed. Stevens lit the saloon interior so the doorway is blown out bright, creating this stark contrast between light and shadow. When Shane walks through that door, he's like an avenging angel stepping into hell. The gunfight itself is quick and brutal. Wilson barely gets his gun halfway up before Shane shoots him. Then Shane culls Riker and his brother. It's efficient, professional, and joyless. This isn't glory, it's just necessary violence performed by a man who's better at it than anyone else. Ford said Shane represented everything he loved about Westerns: the moral clarity, the gorgeous landscape, the exploration of violence and civilization, the tragic hero who saves the community but can't join it. Stevens had taken all the mythic elements of the genre and assembled them perfectly. It's a film that works as entertainment, as mythology, and as a serious drama about the cost of violence and the impossibility of escape from your past. Number 4. Destry Rides Eskingen. George Marshall's comedy, Western starring James Stewart and Marlene Dietrich, was the film Ford pointed to when people asked about westerns that successfully mixed genres. Destry Rides Again took the conventions of the western and ran them through a comedy filter without ever mocking the genre itself, and Ford thought that balance was nearly impossible to achieve. Most comedy westerns either become parodies that undermine the mythology, or they're regular westerns with forced comic relief. Marshall found a third way. James Stewart plays Tom Destry Jr., son of a legendary lawman who comes to the lawless town of Bottleneck as the new deputy sheriff. Everyone expects another hard-case gunfighter like his father. Instead, they get a mild-mannered man who doesn't even carry guns, prefers to talk his way out of conflicts, and seems completely ineffective. The town's criminal element, led by saloon owner Kent, thinks they've lucked into the perfect patsy. They're very wrong. What Ford loved about Stewart's performance is how he played Destry as genuinely principled, rather than secretly tough. This isn't a gunfighter pretending to be harmless. Destry really does believe in law and reason over violence. He's not naive, he understands the reality of frontier violence. But he's committed to trying a better way. When he finally does strap on guns for the climactic shootout, it's a tragedy rather than a triumph. The system failed, reason failed, and violence became necessary. Stewart plays that moment with real regret rather than righteous fury. Marlene Dietrich as Frenchie, the saloon singer caught between the criminals and Destry, brings genuine complexity to what could have been a stock character. She's attracted to Destry's decency, but doesn't believe his methods can work in a place as corrupt as Bottleneck. Her cynicism comes from experience, not cruelty. The film gives her a complete arc from skeptic to believer to martyr, and Dietrich plays it without ever losing the character's edge or street smarts. The famous fight scene between Dietrich and Una Merkel, where two women brawl through the saloon, was revolutionary for its time. Ford admired how Marshall shot it completely straight, no winking at the camera or playing it for cheap laughs. These women are genuinely angry and fighting seriously, and the scene treats that conflict with respect. It's funny because it's unexpected and well choreographed, not because it's mocking the participants. Ford also praised the film's pacing. At 94 minutes, Destry Rides Again never drags. Every scene serves either character development or plot advancement. The comedy never interrupts the story. It emerges naturally from the characters and situations. When the tone shifts darker in the final act, it doesn't feel jarring because Marshall laid the groundwork throughout. The criminal conspiracy is always genuinely dangerous, even when Destry is making jokes about it. The film's influence on later westerns was enormous. The idea of the reluctant hero who'd rather talk than shoot became a template others copied endlessly. But Marshall did it first and did it best, creating a character who felt real rather than like a comedic device. Ford said any director who wanted to mix comedy and drama in westerns should study Destry Rides Again, because it showed exactly how to walk that tightrope without falling off either side into parody or pretension. Marshall proved westerns could be funny without being frivolous, and that comedy could actually deepen dramatic moments rather than undercutting them. Number 3, Tumbleweeds. King Baggett directed this silent western starring William S. Hart, and Ford called it the most authentic western ever made. Hart wasn't some stage actor playing cowboy. He grew up on the frontier, knew that life firsthand, and his films had a grit and realism that talking pictures mostly abandoned in favor of Hollywood polish. Tumbleweeds tells the story of the Cherokee strip land rush of 1893, and it's both a romance and an elegy for the dying Old West. Hart plays Dawn Carver, a range rider who falls for a settler woman, but has to compete against a crooked land speculator for both her affection and a decent piece of land during the rush. The plot is simple, but what makes the film extraordinary is Hart's complete authenticity in the role. The way he moves, sits on a horse, handles his gear, it's all genuine because he actually lived that life. Ford said watching Hart was like watching the real West preserved on film before it disappeared completely. The land rush sequence is what elevates Tumbleweeds into the realm of masterpiece. Baggett used over 1,000 extras, hundreds of wagons and horses, and shot the entire chaotic scramble for land practically. No miniatures, no trick photography, just thousands of people racing across open prairie in what was essentially a controlled riot. The sequence runs nearly 10 minutes, and the scale and energy are overwhelming. Ford studied this sequence obsessively and tried to replicate its power in his own films. What impressed Ford most was how Baggett captured the violence and desperation beneath the supposedly orderly land rush. People cheat, cut each other off, sabotage competitors, even resort to gunfire to claim what they want. The thin veneer of civilization drops away instantly when free land is at stake, and the film doesn't look away from that ugliness. This was the American frontier stripped of romance, shown as it actually was, brutal and competitive and morally complicated. Hart's performance carries real emotional weight, because he's playing a man watching his entire way of life disappear. The open range is being carved into property claims. Cowboys are becoming obsolete. Carver participates in the land rush because he has to adapt or die. But you can see the loss in Hart's face. He's winning a piece of land and losing a world. That melancholy runs through the entire film, and Ford said it captured something essential about Western expansion that most Westerns ignored. The romance between Carver and Molly is handled with surprising subtlety for a silent film. There's genuine chemistry between Hart and Barbara Bedford, and their relationship develops naturally rather than through melodramatic contrivances. When Carver proves himself worthy by winning land fairly despite the speculators cheating, it feels earned rather than inevitable. The film rewards actual virtue rather than just heroic posturing. Ford talked about how tumbleweeds influenced his entire approach to Westerns. The attention to authentic detail, the melancholy tone, the understanding that Western expansion involved real loss alongside progress. The spectacular action grounded in practical filmmaking rather than tricks. All of that came from studying what Hart and Baggett accomplished. Ford said modern audiences had forgotten tumbleweeds, but it remained the gold standard for anyone serious about making honest Westerns. The film's final moments show Carver settled on his land with Molly, having achieved everything he wanted. But the last shot pulls back to show the fenced property, the end of the open range, the closing of the frontier. Hart literally looks at the camera and delivers a title card about the passing of the Old West. It's a deeply personal moment from a man who lived through that transition, and Ford called it the most honest and moving conclusion any Western ever had. That's why Tumbleweeds earned its place as number 3 on his list. Number 2, The Big Trail. Raoul Walsh's epic Western, starring a young John Wayne in his first leading role, was the film Ford admitted changed how he thought about shooting landscapes. The Big Trail follows a wagon train on the Oregon Trail, and Walsh shot it in an early widescreen format called Grandeur that required special cameras and theaters. Most audiences never saw it that way because theaters couldn't afford the equipment and the film bombed commercially. But Ford saw it in grandeur, and he said it was like seeing Westerns for the first time. What makes The Big Trail extraordinary is the scale. Walsh took his cast and crew on an actual cross-country trek, filming in real locations from Montana to Wyoming to Oregon. The river crossings aren't done on a studio backlot with a painted backdrop. They're real rivers with real wagons being floated across on makeshift rafts. The mountain sequences aren't miniatures. They're actual pioneers descending cliffs using ropes and pulleys, with the cameras right there capturing every terrifying moment. Ford was obsessed with one sequence in particular, where the wagon train has to lower wagons down a steep cliff face. Walsh positioned cameras to show the full scope of the operation, hundreds of people working together to accomplish something that seems impossible. The human figures are tiny against the massive landscape, emphasizing both their vulnerability and their determination. Ford said that sequence taught him more about composing shots in Monument Valley than any film school could have. The way Walsh used natural formations to dwarf his characters while still making their struggle feel epic, that became fundamental to Ford's visual language. John Wayne was only 23 and completely inexperienced when Walsh cast him. The studio wanted Gary Cooper, but Walsh saw something in Wayne's physical presence and his natural authority on horseback. Wayne is rough in the film, still learning his craft, but there's an authenticity to his performance that more polished actors couldn't have achieved. He moves like someone who actually knows frontier life, and Ford recognized that quality immediately. He'd later cast Wayne repeatedly, refining what Walsh discovered. The film doesn't romanticize the Oregon Trail. People die, wagons break down. The journey is brutal and exhausting, and Walsh shows that reality without flinching. There's a sequence where the train crosses a desert and people are dying of thirst, their lips cracked and bleeding, desperation replacing hope. It's genuinely harrowing, and it reminded Ford that Westerns should show the cost of Western expansion, not just the glory. Ford called The Big Trail the most ambitious Western ever attempted, and said Walsh's failure to find an audience was one of cinema's great injustices. The film proved you could make westerns on an epic scale while maintaining authenticity. That spectacle and realism weren't contradictory goals. Everything Ford accomplished visually in his later westerns, the way he used landscape as character, and composed shots to emphasize man's relationship with nature, started with watching what Raoul Walsh accomplished in The Big Trail. Number 1. The Iron Horse. Here's where Ford's list gets complicated, because The Iron Horse was directed by John Ford himself in 1924. But late in life, Ford claimed he was merely executing someone else's vision, that the film's producer and uncredited co-director was the real genius behind it. Whether that's true or just Ford's complicated relationship with his own success is debatable. What's certain is that Ford considered The Iron Horse the blueprint for every great Western that followed. The film dramatizes the building of the first transcontinental railroad, following the years of brutal labor connecting the Union Pacific and Central Pacific lines. It's an epic production that used thousands of extras, real trains, and actual locations. Ford shot it in Nevada with a crew living in tent cities, essentially recreating the conditions of the original railroad construction. The scale was unprecedented for 1924 and remained unmatched for years. What makes The Iron Horse significant isn't just its scope, but its understanding that the Western isn't really about individuals. It's about collective effort, about communities building civilization in harsh conditions. The hero of the film isn't the lead actor George O'Brien. It's the railroad itself and the thousands of workers, both celebrated and forgotten, who made it real. That philosophy, that Westerns should honor ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things through cooperation, became central to everything Ford believed about the genre. The action sequences still impress. A massive buffalo stampede shot with real animals and stuntmen on horseback, getting dangerously close. A train robbery choreographed with precision timing. The final Golden Spike ceremony is staged with such authentic detail that it feels like documentary footage. Ford understood that practical filmmaking, doing things for real whenever possible, gave Westerns a power that studio trickery could never match. The film also doesn't shy away from showing the dark side of westward expansion, the displacement of Native Americans, the exploitation of Chinese laborers, the violence and greed that accompany progress. For a 1924 film, it's surprisingly honest about American history. Ford never stopped believing Westerns should grapple with moral complexity rather than simply celebrating conquest. Ford said whether he truly directed The Iron Horse or just helped execute someone else's vision didn't matter. What mattered was that someone had figured out how to make Westerns into genuine American mythology, how to use the genre to explore who Americans were and what the country cost to build. Every Western that followed, including his own, was just refining and reinterpreting what The Iron Horse established. That's why it was number 1. So there you have it, 9 Westerns John Ford called masterpieces. Films that shaped how he saw the genre and influenced everything he created. These weren't just movies he enjoyed. They were the Westerns he measured his own work against. The films that proved what the genre could accomplish when filmmakers committed to authenticity, moral complexity, and honest storytelling.